Our first speaker is Nathan Mudyi Sentance from the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences here in Sydney, which is known to the locals as the Powerhouse Museum, where he's head of First Nations collections. And he'll be presenting alongside Kirsten Thorpe, one of my colleagues here at the University of Technology, Sydney, in the Jumbunna Research Institute, who, for reasons that she can choose to disclose or not, would rather not use her vocal cords during this session. So Nathan, whenever you're ready, do feel free to share your slides and get going.
Yindamalaja Gayamegu Nurumbangu, Yindamalaja Gayamegu Mujigangu, Yindamalaja Nari Mujigangu. As protocol for Indigenous people here in the lands now known as Australia, I'd like to start this session by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Gayamegu people, and pay my respects to their ancestors, and also acknowledge all the Aboriginal lands that you may be streaming from today. So I'm Nathan Mudyi Sentance, I'm a Wiradjuri man. So what we're going to talk about today is actually streaming from a report that Dr. Kirsten Thorpe, myself, and Lauren Booker were involved in as a partnership between Jumbunna Research and Wikimedia Australia. So from that report, we had a lot of sort of recommendations and reflections that come out of that report. So we thought we'd talk about the most sort of like historically, the most relevant ones for sort of talking about history or history communication on the Wikipedia platform. But firstly, I guess I'll just yarn about myself. As I said, I'm a Wiradjuri man. Family's traditionally from Mudyi, New South Wales, which is about 4 hours northwest of Gadigal land, which is now known as Sydney. I grew up, as I said, on Dark and Joan country, and I've been sort of working in galleries, libraries, archives, and museums for nearly 15 years. At places like the State Library of New South Wales with Dr. Kirsten Thorpe, and at the Australian Museum, now at the Powerhouse, and also at the University of Sydney Library, helping with their First Nations protocols. And I guess that is really what started my interest in this sort of space, was mostly around history communication, and always thinking about whose history we're hearing and whose story is missing from that discussion, as we've seen in a lot of, like, as me and Kirsten have both seen, but also a lot of people who work in institutions that believe what they do, their collections construct memory, collective memory. You can often see that the people who construct that memory are not neutral bystanders, and that memory that gets constructed usually leaves out many voices. And I think First Nations people are some of the voices that either get left out or misrepresented. And so that's a sort of energy that sort of also the mindset that sort of came into initially with this discussion. And I guess it sort of came out of me and Kirsten were lucky enough to be sort of invited by Wikimedia Australia initially to do an editathon for a NAIDOC week several years ago. And from that, I think it basically, I think Wikimedia themselves already were aware of potential misrepresentations or erasures of Indigenous peoples and cultures within Wikipedia. But I think it's sort of, that Wikipedia-thon was an emphasis to continue more. So me, Kirsten, and Lauren Booker worked on that sort of, on the report, which sort of stemmed from sort of collaborative yarning sessions where we all sort of brought our own perspectives on history, on Wikipedia, and sort of how it was actually meant to be shaped around actually the excellent protocols, which are protocols designed for libraries and archives. And it was meant to be shaped around, particularly around description and access, which I think is Protocol 5 of the Atsalan protocols. And we found that while that was our focus, it quickly shifted much broader, because we found that description is only it's sort of a symptom, not the cause of an issue, but it's something that needs to be addressed. But I think it has to be addressed thinking about a larger scale and thinking about things like Indigenous research principles, Indigenous protocols, Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights. So that's sort of what brought us here. And I wanted to sort of introduce myself first, initially too, because one of the things we talk about in the report is we sort of apply Indigenous standpoint theory, where who we are is actually very much not a detriment to the report. Like, we are not attempting, as I said, with museums, oftentimes they attempt to be objective, but all that does is erase the hands that actually construct a very biased history. So instead of that, we actually want to put at the forefront who we are, our identities, and how that shapes how we view this work. So I'll just throw over to Kirsten if you wanted to yarn about anything else, to introduce yourself. Oh.
Kirsten, we're unable to hear you for some reason, even though you're not muted. I'm not sure what the issue is there. I think, unfortunately, we may not be able to hear Kirsten. So, Nathan, why don't you continue?
Let's see, Michael, can you
Oh,
hear
now
me?
you're back.
Sorry, it's a glitch of a week. I was just saying, thanks, Nathan. Great to be here with everyone. I'm calling in from Darkinjung country on the Central Coast, and just introducing myself as a Warramai woman from Port Stephens, New South Wales, and just listening to Nathan talking about yarning and seeing some of the information on the chat. I guess, you know, when we were talking about our connection with Wikimedia and Wikipedia, we were talking about our connection at the State Library of New South Wales of being around history every day, and then trying to work through the challenges, I guess, of how Indigenous knowledges are brought into that space when information is biased or not supported by community. So will we move on, Nathan, to the next?
Sure. Cool. I'll take this as well, if that's okay. I think this is one of the things that really came out of our discussions, was thinking about potential priorities for Wikimedia and Wikipedia editors to focus on. And again, I think this came out of our initial wiki editathon, where we thought, what could be the potential benefits from this? And I think, you know, disrupting the invisibility of First Nations sovereignty and stories, you know, the normalization of Indigenous knowledges and enabling a right of reply. So both me and Kirsten are part of the Indigenous Archives Collective. It was actually founded by Kirsten and Dr. Shannon Borkhead. And in 2019, the collective released a statement on the right of reply, which is kind of, you may have heard of right of reply before, like in terms of like journalism, where they use it to basically say that it's only ethical if you were to write about someone, that you should be able to, you should provide them the right to respond in the same platform that you are writing about them. Usually, you know, letting them provide comment or a response. And I think we've sort of talked about this in the terms of like archives, that the fact that archival collections are often written by outsider point of views, which often leaves out Indigenous perspective. So, you know, Aboriginal people and our history and our culture is usually written about us without us. So we believe, and very often in a very, can be in a slanderous or derogatory way. So we believe that, you know, we should have the right to set the record straight and provide more context and provide a reply to that. And we were just thinking about how Wikipedia could be a platform to enable that. So that was some of the things that we thought could be like sort of priorities. And I guess, you know, and even thinking about, yeah, I guess the normalization, often thinking about the fact that everywhere you go in the lands now known as Australia is Aboriginal land and has an Aboriginal history that predates that town or this region. And that still continues today. So, but that often is forgotten on Wikipedia, or is often say with the town that my mob are from, Mudyi, it's a footnote at the start, which it basically implies that there was an Aboriginal history, then settlement happened, no other Aboriginal history since then. So it's about sort of disrupting that, but also normalizing that, yeah, the land that you walk on is Aboriginal land. One of my critiques against, like, I guess, colonial statues is the fact that they sort of, just from existing and being around and you walking past them, sort of normalizes the actions, or just sort of makes it part of the background, which, yeah, just normalizes the actions or the figures of these people. So I think country was a big one. And I guess another big one is events.
Got
Events
a minute to go, Nathan.
Oh, far out. Hectic. So I'll just go on. I'll let Kirsten talk.
So Nathan's points about, you know, the settler narrative, I guess, came out really strongly in the research that we did. And one of the things that we really touched on in the report that we'll share with you at the end is making sure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are involved in the process of telling stories and making histories on Wikipedia. And I guess for us, it was even thinking further about that idea of not filling the gaps, but actually making sure that people were involved in a relational and accountable process. And we contemplated a lot within that work, you know, how would Indigenous research methodologies like Archibald's storywork principles be woven in? And I guess the next point, Nathan, on the next slide that we talked about was in terms of people knowing and understanding critical information literacy. So understanding that, you know, a lot of the books and materials that are written that would be referenced in Wikipedia haven't been written by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So how do you actually support people to have material created by communities? And the example that we've drawn on here is the Worimi Wikipedia page that basically tells a settler narrative, because they've been the sources, the anthropological sources that people have been able to readily draw upon in open access collections. And the page in itself tells nothing about the 65,000-year history of the Worimi community or the leadership that existed in there. I'll turn over to you, Nathan, quickly for your example.
Yeah. And I'll just...
That's about time, Nathan. So if you want to conclude this example, that'd be great. Thanks, mate.
All right, cool. I was just going to quickly say that I guess in my trying to become a Wikipedia editor, one of the things I really wanted to do was actually write an article about my great-grandmother, Dinah Mudyi, because she's sort of a famous Wiradjuri woman. And one of the first things I thought was really funny was Wikipedia sort of is like, are you connected to the subject? And I understand why they asked that, but at the same time, I actually felt that actually made me a stronger editor for this thing, because if I get it wrong, I'll get yelled at by my family. So it actually makes me much more accountable to the subject matter. And I guess to Kirsten's point, it's like the importance of relationality and how can we embed relationality into Wikipedia. So Mandan Guru, thank you.
Thank you. And Nathan, we've got the report on the next slide. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you very much, Kirsten and Nathan. And for the record, the report's been shared in the Slack, and I'll make sure it's on the Wikihistories website too. Really important talk. So glad that you guys could come along and share that with us. Our next speaker is, sorry, I should have got your name right, Paola Cappelluti.
Paola, yes.
Paola,
do you hear me well?
From Milan. So please, Paola, share screen and start going whenever you like.
Okay.
10 minutes.
I share the screen. Just a moment. Just a moment. Let's see. Okay, can you see the slides?
Coming up. There it is. Yep, absolutely. Start slide.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, let's start. So in the first part of our research, we carried out a comparative analysis of the metric of the entries to see if there are any substantial differences between the 5 different language versions. The second part instead focused on the Italian talk pages dedicated to Ukraine war. We analyzed the discourse published on the talk page to identify the main frames of the conversation and the relative interaction of different contributors to the discussion. Methodologically, we drew on media frame analysis from this point of view, framing establishes the boundaries within which an issue can be discussed. The last part of our research focuses on the analysis of 16 semi-structured interviews we conducted with 8 members of the English community Wikipedia and 8 members of the Italian one. The people to be interviewed were chosen from people who had participated in the construction of the article about the Ukraine war and were contacted directly via online. So the main element we analyzed is the time elapsed between the outbreak of the Russian invasion and the creation of the related Wikipedia entry in the English, French, Spanish, German, and of course, Italian language version. The data show a very defined situation. While all the other language versions published the entry in the immediacy of the event, with a very little gap between them, the Italian version waited more than 19 days, precisely 471 hours before publication. The Italian version, therefore, differs completely from all the other major language versions, but it is particularly from the English version that the difference stands out the most, since the latter has a negative publication date, having published the entry 10 hours on the invasion of Ukraine before it took place. This was made possible because by the fact that an English Wikipedia user thought he had enough information to create the entry. This early publication is unusual even for the very timely English version. And in fact, there are several users on the talk pages raising concern about this practice. So we have seen how the Italian language community stands out for its differences in dealing with the article on the war. What we asked was, how could this happen? And to try to shed light on this dynamic, we analyzed the Italian talk pages related to the 2 main entries about the Ukraine invasion. A central element that emerged very clearly is the pride with which several users claim the specific difference of the Italian Wikipedia community. In fact, for a big part of the Italian community, adding information too quickly completely distorts what should be the essence of Wikipedia, an encyclopedia and not a news site. So many users feel pride in belonging to a community that defends a value held sacred, and the language version that is considered most heretical is the English one. And as several studies focusing on the Italian community have already shown, this attitude toward the so-called recentism is one of the elements that many members of the Italian community consider constitutive of their difference from the other communities. And however, as time goes by, when it begins to become clear how the Italian community is the only Wikipedia where this entry has not been published yet, more and more users have become doubtful of these strategies, as you can read from these conversation excerpts. The main point of a contention, in fact, is once again what the essence of the Wikipedia should be. Is Wikipedia a classical encyclopedia, or can it also contain more references to current events and offer a product that manages to be informative even about events that are taking place in the present? And on this point, Wikipedia in Italian and Wikipedia in English propose a very different solution. While the Italian tries to be more a traditional encyclopedia, Wikipedia in English prefers a more dynamic approach. So in the discussion we have seen so far, the reason given for publishing or not the entry referred almost exclusively to reason internal to the logic of how Wikipedia works. But what happens when one of the reasons adopted for not publishing the entry is related to the war itself? So the conflict-related argument that is put forward most often concerns the need for Wikipedia not to get up in the logic of the war in any way. For those proposing this argument, just intervening in the construction of an encyclopedia entry risks making the encyclopedia itself a victim of propaganda, as one cannot be sure of avoiding the misinformation that inevitably circulates at these political junctures. And rather significantly, most of the people making this argument in the Italian Wikipedia are administrators. who are very concerned about maintaining Wikipedia's neutral role. The main points being raised in the talk pages concern whether Wikipedia in Italian should conform more to the other Wikipedias, and whether the responsibility or blame for this difference lies with an abuse of power on the part of the Italian administrators. However, there are several users who suggest how this problem have been particularly exacerbated by this war, as if it were something intrinsic to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict that make some of the aporias of how Wikipedia in Italian works even more clear. And so to further explore this point, we carried out 16 interviews. Our first result that emerges is that English community tends to ignore the Italian one, while the Italian community often looks to the English one as a model, although a negative one. And the big questions we asked were, why did it take so long for the Italian Wikipedia to publish the entry on the war? And on the other side, why the English Wikipedia was so quick to publish the article? And from the answer we got, it turns out that the delay was not due to political pressure, but just to internal issues. On the other hand, Wikipedia is perceived as one of the few places where people can get balanced, accurate information based on reliable sources. That said, in a world full of fake news and unreliable sources, getting that information out there quickly is really important. So if the war has exacerbated the conflict, but it's not the root cause, what is the reason for this chronic delay in the publication of the article? From what emerges from these interviews, there are a couple of factors at play. Firstly, some members of the community are concerned about the relatively small size of the Italian language community. With fewer people available to fact-check and verify information, they worry about the potential for errors to slip through. And additionally, the Italian media ecosystem that the Italian Wikipedia community relies on is sometimes seen as untrustworthy, which further increases their caution. The other reason is more ideological in nature. Many members of the Italian community see themselves as the embodiment of what Wikipedia should be, an encyclopedia, we said, rather than a news site. And as a result, they prioritize accuracy and thoroughness over speed when it comes to published article. In our opinion, the first factor is based on a real problem, but perhaps magnified. There is no question that the Italian language community does not have the numbers of the people that other language communities have. And yes, the media ecosystem perhaps is less transparent than in other countries. That said, it seems to us that all of this does not justify such an uncompromising attitude that the Italian community holds against recentisms. And in our opinion, at play here is also too much power held by administrators who lack trust in the Wikipedia communities. This really seems to us to be a factor that somewhat betrays the original spirit of Wikipedia, much more than the tendency to become a new site that fragments so much the Italian community. And I'm finished, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Paola. And it was nice to acknowledge your co-author there, Oscar Ricci, at the end, who was unable to be here today. Thank you. Now to conclude this, this paper session on the nature of time in Wikipedia, we've heard about the deep reciprocal time of Indigenous Australia and the way the present figures in Italian Wikipedia. Now we're going to hear from Ziko van Dijk about the representation of the future in Wikipedia. So Ziko, whenever you like, please share your slides, and you've got 10 minutes. You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear and see everything.
Yes, great, thank you. Well, dear members of the audience, how does Wikipedia deal with future events? Wikipedia is supposed to offer established knowledge, but the future is not yet established. So how Wikipedia can still talk about future events? To keep an overview for this little study, I'll use my wiki model I introduced in 2021 in my book Wikis und die Wikipedia verstehen. By the end of my talk, I will present 3 distinct categories of future events mentioned on Wikipedia. Okay, now this was actually the slide for it. Well, let's start by making a basic assumption explicit. According to most philosophers, humans can't know for sure what will happen in the future. This is because we are part of the universe and can't observe it from an outside perspective. So we can't say if the future is uncertain or if everything is already predetermined. Since we can't know, it's not really important either. There isn't any supernatural being that can tell us about the future. We also can't analyze the past well enough to accurately calculate what will happen in the future. Think of Isaac Asimov and his psychohistory. I suppose that the majority of Wikipedia contributors think the same, but this is only a guess, and it would be interesting to research what Wikipedians actually believe about the future. Because of time limitations, I won't go into detail about the texts that I have read to prepare this talk. However, I found inspiration in the ideas of the theorist of history, Reinhard Koselleck, and other texts about futurology, utopias, dystopias, imaginations, prophecies, classifications of foresight methods, etc. And if you wonder about this chart, it is here only for proving that I have read those texts and don't simply commit name dropping. Now, let's have a look at my wiki model. Within this model, I have identified the key components that are common to wikis like Wikipedia. So I give you a few seconds in order to be not too unprepared. But I do not want to delve into every single element. I'd like to focus on a specific aspect. Wikipedia contributors, so C below, down below, contributors adhere to certain rules when they discuss which topics or objects can be talked about in Wikipedia. So, and typically, the contributors rely on expert-written sources for their contributions. So you can find this in the upper left corner of the chart. E stands for experts, yes, objects in the world, experts write about it, sources, and the contributors are reading those sources, secondary sources. So, what exactly do the Wikipedia rules state? In the various language versions, I found mainly similarities. The general rules say any content published on Wikipedia should be relevant and verifiable. Hence, you have to use expert-authored sources. In addition to these general rules, there are specific guidelines about future events. Wikipedia discourages looking into the crystal ball. The English version of Wikipedia explicitly warns against extrapolation, speculation, future history, and rumors. However, despite these guidelines, you'll still come across numerous examples on Wikipedia where statements about the future are made. First example, in the English version of Wikipedia, there's an article about the 2028 Summer Olympics. When was this article created? Already in 2006, with the assumption that the winning bid would probably take place in the summer of 21. So in 2006, it was not even known in which city the games would take place. In July 27, there was a request to delete the article, Crystal Ball. But the article was kept because there were already announcements from cities that they were investigating whether they would submit a bid, documented by reliable sources. One could now further ask, when exactly should one be allowed to create such an article? For example, when for the first time a city council decides that the city should become a candidate, or only when a city officially files a candidacy to become that city for that Olympics? And besides, how reliable is it that the Olympic Games will take place in so and so many years? For example, In history, there has been already the case that the games were cancelled because of a war. And with the COVID pandemic, we should be even more cautious. So we note, here and in other cases, we are talking about plans. It is important that the planned event and the announcing person or institutions are relevant. The plan is published in a statement by a person or institution that has real influence on the planning and implementation. Second example. In the Wikipedia in English, there's an article about Halley's Comet. Quote, "It last appeared in the inner parts of the solar system in 1986 and will next appear in mid-2061. This is a prediction based on past experience. Natural scientists have calculated this. Similarly, social scientists can make predictions about world population growth, for example. However, predictions are always uncertain because of the many possible factors. For example, it is possible that something will happen to the poor comet on its long journey through the solar system." We note, again, the event must be important, and it is important who makes the statement. In this case, it is not people announcing their own intentions and plans, but experts talking about external things over which they do not have a direct influence. Expert status is key, and here one can discuss how significant the expert must be, whether an outsider's opinion should be mentioned as well. Third and last example, Wikipedia has pages about individual years, including future years. In German Wikipedia, the article about the year 2050 says, November 13th, 200th birthday of the Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson. And this statement about the birthday is guaranteed to come true. Will this birthday be celebrated in the year 2050? Will anybody even think about Stevenson anymore? It does not matter. It is purely a question of definition. Anyone born in 1850 will have his 200th birthday in 2050. This is a kind of truism, isn't it? Well, one can still think of a fourth category, like pure speculation about the future as in fiction, say a science fiction novel. But the actual object here would be the novel. And another example, the classless society according to Karl Marx. That is a subject in itself, a concept from the history of Marxism, a historical object. Or if one considers Karl Marx to be a relevant and credible expert, in that case, the classless society is a prediction. Or a Bolshevik government proclaims the introduction of classless society, then it is a political program, a plan. No fourth category necessary. So I introduce three categories: plans, predictions, and definitions. And now I take the wiki model again. So plans, that means we follow the statement of a relevant person or institution, see above. The plan and the person or institution are objects themselves, objects of the real world that we are going to describe. Predictions, that means we follow the statement of an expert. Definitions, that means the statement is so logical and so trivial that we don't need an expert or source. The statement can be made by a wiki contributor on her own responsibility. And now, challenge me. Are these three categories enough? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ziko. That's so much that came out of that talk. That's really fascinating from a philosophical perspective and from an organizational perspective in Wikipedia.